It's a fine foggy night tonight, and I doubt if anyone has ever told you of the marvelous fogs we have in Aberdeen.
Eugene.
Bakersfield.
Los Angeles.
San Francisco.
He wasn't giving me my props in Oaktown.
Portland. Los Angeles.
Los Angeles de California.
San Francisco.
San Francisco.
You gotta find your Irvine.
Irvine?
And Hanford.
Eugene.
Seattle.
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 Sacramento.
Fresno.
We're going to Vancouver.
Modesto, California. San Diego.
Gina.
You know, there might be an opening for a manager in Visalia next spring.
Yakima, right?
Vallejo, California, the V.
Welcome to the West Coast Sojourn Podcast. I am Donnell Alexander with Lev Anderson, and our guest today is who?
We got P. Frank Williams on from LA at the moment.
Yes, in the building. Great
We're
to see you both.
I know him from the source. There's so many credits. He's a pioneer. We got a whole media thing to go through, from Unsung to his new project with the boys over.
I've been at it for a long time, my friend.
Yes, you have. But I mean, all the Smoke Productions project that you have coming is what I'm interested in now, because you did an event in Inglewood a little while ago. Can you tell us about that show, what it is, podcast with video? What is it exactly?
Yes, so obviously it's good to see you, Donnell, and great to meet you, Lev. I've known Donnell for 30 years when he had hair and some dreads, and he was, going to the bars looking for ladies, and then finally found one, and kids and everything. So, no, I have the new podcast called Must Be the Money, which is a 10-part financial literacy series that I did with the BBC and marketplace.org, which is basically trying to teach financial literacy to young African-American, Latino, Asian kids through people who they can relate to and not old white men telling them about their money. So this season we got Angela Yee from used to be from the Breakfast Club. She does Way Up with Angela Yee. We have Angie Wandu from the Shade Room. Obviously Matt Barnes, who's the executive producer. His sons, Van Lathan, a lot of people, Tavio Samuels from Revolt. So yeah, I mean, we really are trying to give this financial literacy message through people who they can relate to a new generation.
You have like an all-star crew there. How did that come together? Were you approached, or did you approach them?
Well, what happened was I had a friend, Lee Hawkins, who's a journalist formerly of the Wall Street Journal, who I had known from New York and all of that kind of stuff. And he did the business, a podcast, a TV series on Bloomberg about entertainment and business. And so I wrote up a RFP. There was a regular RFP that people submit. I wrote that. I was picked out of a bunch of the people and, given a few dollars, not a lot, not like television, but it's all good. And produced those 10 episodes. So I produced it in association with All the Smoke and Matt, and also through my production company, For the Culture, by the Culture. So I was blessed, obviously, Donnell, as you know, because I know a lot of people. So I was able to call up Van Lathan and Angela Yee and all these people that I know. So I used my relationships for 35 years of music and entertainment to bring that to this podcast. So it's been a joy. It's a little bit, it's working with the BBC Marketplace. It's a little bit different than working with Hulu or Tubi or BET, but it was an adventure.
Do you,
Frank? I'm curious. So, sorry, Donnell. I'm curious, Frank. Since I'm just meeting you today, how did you get into all of this? I mean, you're very involved in all these aspects of the culture and media, and obviously, was it through the source? Was that kind of your introduction into like mainstream?
Well, no,
media,
I think as Donnell knows, Donnell and I
with
worked
this?
together and known each other for a long time. Well, I mean, my first start was, some people know this, but I started out in Oakland, California, son of the Black Panther Party, like a Panther Cub, as well as Felix Mitchell. So I went from a drug don kind of lifestyle with my family to Black revolutionary politics. And so I think that's sort of my beginning. When I was a kid in Oakland, I got my start writing love letters for my homies in the hood. So if you got a crush on Lakeisha, I write give me $10, I'll write you a letter that you might not be able to do. So around 12, 13 that's how I first started getting my dollars. But actually, I started at the Source as a freelancer at the LA Times. I think I met Donnell when I was still working at the paper. I worked as a reporter, general assignment, pop culture music, true crime at the LA Times for about 8 or 9 years. And at the time, the source was bubbling. There was no presence really on the West Coast. I was one of the first writers on the West Coast to really have a permanent voice. So around the early to mid 90s is when I got my start. And a lot of the people that I met at the source, whether it be Buster or, Selwyn or whoever, Suge Knight, they became my friends over 30 plus years. So now that I've been able to sort of transition to music and entertainment, a lot of those people that I met, my peers from those times, we're still working. Carlito, television, film, Eric Parker, whoever else. So it's been good. Michael Elliott is a screenwriter. So I think we've all got our tentacles in different parts of entertainment, but we all kind of have the source as a background. Even Peter Thomas, Kenny Burns, there's a bunch of us who are a source alum.
When did you realize? Well, I'm just wondering, like, when did you realize that hip hop was going to kind of take over the world and become this cultural force? Did you
I'm not
imagine
sure
that
I realized
the
it,
rest of your
but I think that probably in the early 90s or so when I saw, the source, and Donnell knows I came from the sort of the inside out source in terms of hip hop, meaning I was a part of the culture and the real world really wasn't thinking of it as something real in the early 90s. I remember I went to the Grammys in 94 or so. Whenever Method Man won, "You're All I Need to Get By" with that Mary J. And they wouldn't even let us barely in the press
90,
room. I was in a
94.
limo with Meth that night and he won. And he was like, F the Grammys, because we didn't really have a voice. They barely let me have a press pass. And now hip hop is the predominant music across the globe. I think as a B-boy, and especially a black man in white mainstream culture and white mainstream media, I saw how hip hop was taking over. And being at the source as a freelancer, I wrote Easy East's cover story in 1995. Tupac when he died in 96, a lot of the iconic ones. I saw how white suburban culture, and Donnell can attest to this, was loving hip hop and becoming the buyers and the consumers of it. And so, not to say that I foreshadowed that what it would be today, but I just knew, especially going to white school like San Diego State, and I went to journalism school at Columbia, I saw it. You know what I mean? You could just tell by the parties, all of those parties and all those albums that were doing well, it wasn't because a bunch of black kids from the hoods were buying it. It was because white suburban kids were loving the Beastie Boys and Chuck D and all of that kind of stuff. So I think as a kid, probably as a teenager to a young man, is when I saw the power of hip hop.
I want to go on about your career. We're going to talk about it nonstop, but just seeing you reminded me of one of the critical moments in my career following hip hop, being aware, being a part of all the stuff in the 90s, which was a great time to be coming of age for someone like you and me. But
Right.
the night in the car, I remember we sat in Hollywood. I think we came back from Unity or something like that downtown, and you played
Wow,
me a
you taking it
tape, an
back, Unity.
unmarked tape. Well, wait till you hear the end of the sentence. The tape you played me with no label on it was "Hit 'Em Up." You played me "Hit 'Em Up" in the car, like
Wow.
about 2:30 in the morning, and I said that's going to be a problem because there had been mixtapes. I mean, there had been disc tapes, so many disc tapes, tracks, but that was just so
Right.
beyond. I just remember you, sitting in the car with you and not even believing it was real. Do you remember? You don't recall that, do you?
Oh, right. That's a long time ago. Obviously, there's a lot of weed smoke and alcohol that went into those times. But I do remember, obviously, being around Death Row at that time. I went to Can-Am in real life with Suge, and obviously saw Tupac and was covering Death Row at the time, and then wrote Dog Pound's bio, Daz, all this crazy shit. But I remember that feeling of that time on the West Coast. And, because I was going back and forth to the East and the West at the time, of feeling afraid. I felt afraid as a West Coast person to be in New York. And I felt afraid as a West Coast person sometimes in LA for my East Coast people. And it was a very time when you had to sort of pick a side. And I think Tupac, who was a very young man, obviously at this age, and, I think when you're in your 20s, you don't realize what you're doing. And I think Ice-T, who I produce a show called Unsung. I'm not if you're familiar with Unsung. It's like a behind the music. And I know that Ice-T, in one of his stories to me, Tupac came and played Hit 'Em Up before it came out. And I told him, don't put that out. That's a horrible idea. You're going to cause a lot of problems. And I think towards the end of his life, and even though Tupac is someone we love, and obviously I've written about him and put him on all these shows, that was a critical mistake. I don't think it cost him his life that night when he was killed. He was killed over some gang stuff, but the tension and the vibrations that he put out in the air about death and destruction ultimately cost him his life, and it for sure cost Chris's life. I'm talking about Biggie. Biggie was killed because of the vibe of Hit 'Em Up. There's no way around it. I was there literally you know what I mean? So I know exactly all of the stuff that happened. And that song, Donnell, you had to choose a side at that point. And it was either East or West. And unfortunately, the negativity in it. And once you got to talk about somebody's wives and kids and fucking, it was egregious. I see some of these guys doing it today, I'm a haunt you in your lifetime, the drill rappers, and you know what I mean? And I see Kanye, Drake and Kendrick talking about, I don't approve of that. I have a code. We come from a code where you don't do that. And I think Tupac violated the code.
Sorry if this is totally out of left field, but I wonder, hearing about your Panther background with your father and coming up in Oakland, there was always talk that some of the East Coast, West Coast rap beefs stemmed even from some of that East Coast, West Coast Panther beefs that were,
these are the kids of those people.
Yaki Pro or whatever.
Yeah, Yaki is a child of the Black Panther Party. Yaki Gaddafi, who was a part of the Outlaws. Tupac, obviously, his mother was a Black Panther, and all of their uncles, like my uncles and cousins and certain people. And, I think the demise of the Black Panther Party can be attributed to the rise of gang violence across America because the elders, the leaders keeping these kids off the street led to gang violence. And I do think hip hop rose out of the spirit of the demise of the Black Panther Party in the late 70s, early 80s. So I do think they are connected. I'm not sure about the Panthers and the hip hop, violence, but I do think that there is something to be said for the lack of role models and the lack of these elders in our communities. You can look at the beginning of the Crips. They killed all these programs in South Central, which the kids now had to kind of band together. So I think there's some validity to what you're saying, my brother.
So, you couldn't have known all the things you were going to achieve in TV back then. And you were doing that delicate dance with the LA Times and The Source. How did you know when it was time to go and if you were making the right decision?
Well, I've been super blessed in my career to kind of see the writing on the wall. And obviously you and I were hanging out back then, pretty cool and a lot. I think at the end of 98, 99, there was a point when the LA Times was sort of getting to the place where it was becoming, I can't remember what they call it, where the editorial was mixing with the advertising, meaning that they were doing certain things that were compromising the editorial because they wanted the money. And I also saw the rise of print media in terms of magazines at the Source, how it was becoming even more important than a regular newspaper. I just felt like as a newspaper guy most of my life, I was working in the newsroom and I saw how people were reading that kind of stuff less. And then obviously by the 2000s or whatever, the rise of the digital boom, I saw how those people who used to read those 3,000 word articles that I wrote about Suge or Ice Cube or Scarface may not want to read that. They wanted to put it on their phone and start to see it. So I saw that was happening. I was fortunate to transition to the Source, become full-time in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then magazines led to TV shows, which led to documentaries. And today I'm talking to you about a podcast. So I just keep trying to pay attention, to the signpost on the road. And where it says exit, I try to get off.
Mm-hmm. You were always excellent with your relationships. Can you talk about how you were able to get to Unsung from the magazine world? Was that about relationships or was that your resume?
Well, everything in life is about relationships to me. Who fucks with you, who likes with you. I've been friends with Brad, Scarface, for 31 years or some shit like that. I've known Eric Sermon since 96. I knew Busta since 98. Selwyn hired me in 97. And so, Jesse Collins, I did the BET Awards with him in 2005. And so I think it's important that you stay connected and if people like you, if you do a good job, there's going to be some bumps. I've had some headaches with certain people I work to, but I've also been fortunate. I just was texting with Benny Boom, and Benny used to be on the couch at the Source before he blew up. And now he's a movie director, television, film, or whatever the case may be. You know, one of my boys works at Amazon. He was a kid that used to read my articles in the Source in the '90s. So I think it's all about relationships and who likes you and doing a good job. You know what I mean? Because you never want people to say, "Hey, that person's not gonna." They don't want to not recommend you. You want people to always to recommend you and do that. And it's fascinating to me because I see now. Sometimes I'm on calls and there's kids who are like 35 who read my articles back in the '90s, and I know my stuff like that. So they're looking at me as a nostalgic OG. You know, I prefer not to call myself an OG, but I am, I guess, to some extent. But it's definitely about cultivating relationships, doing a good job. You know, Houdini Unsung happened because I knew Ecstasy. Bone Thugs and Harmony Unsung happened because I wrote Bone Thugs and Harmony's first cover story in the Source in '95. You know what I mean? Ghetto Boys Unsung happened because I wrote about the Ghetto Boys in the Source in '96. And so it's all of those things that happened. Too Short, you know, Unsung happened because I knew Too Short since '95 before, some shit like that. E40, same thing. So I think cultivating relationships. I'm doing a podcast now, probably with E40 and Too Short, is because they trust me and they know me, right? They know me. That's my brother. He's not going to do anything. And I think the biggest thing I've benefited from is the fact that I keep one foot in white mainstream culture with the white folk and play my game at Tubi, Hulu, whoever, but I also keep both feet directly in the culture. And so that's why you have my company called For the Culture, By the Culture, because I'm doing it from a person that's from inside the culture and making sure that people of color who are represented actually produce and write it. Because a lot of times when I'm working on something, it may be about people of color, but ain't nobody of color except for me and a couple of people actually producing it. So that's my intent, is to make sure that more people of color get to benefit from the things that are about them from a financial stake.
Right. Do you have a you had me in the Source. I was banned from the Source for a minute, but you had enough heft that I was able to go to the Source back in the '90s in the office.
Talk about not burning bridges.
Yeah, you mentioned Too Short, and I have this question I want to ask about Too Short, just based on something he said in The Wildest Party Never Told, Freaknik. He said that there was no
the
such
Freaknik,
thing
yeah.
as in Freaknik. It was a weird transition, but trust me. He said that there was no such thing as twerking back then, that it was just booty shaking. Is that relationship with Two Short something from you that goes back to Oakland? You definitely bring Oakland with you wherever you go, even if it's Atlanta. Is that a relationship like that?
Well, no, I am Oakland. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think for me and Todd, you know, I saw Todd on the bus when I was 12 or 13 years old, riding the 14, East 14th bus. I can't remember if that's the 40, whatever else. He had his boom box. He was sitting in the back. And then obviously later on, when I got to the Source and they had stories about him, they're like, well, shit, you should go do it. And so I wrote about him in the Source in the '90s, right? And I wrote his bio for Roberta at Jive. And so those relationships, like I say, are very key. And then for Todd, I think when he said, they call it twerking, but it was booty shaking back then. They just might have changed the phrase. And I think him being there on the ground at Freaknik in the mid to early '90s, it just was a different world than what it is today. I mean, you still can call it twerking. I mean, if you want to just semantics.
Did you have a hard time getting people in their middle ages, to talk about the wild stuff they did when they were kids?
By no means, no. Most people wanted to run their mouth. People want to talk about their exploits when they was 25, 23. You know, in the internet right now, motherfuckers run their mouth about everything. Dame Dash, whoever, they just want to talk. I never seen so many grown-ass men acting like teenage girls in my life. And so, but for the film, obviously, you know, it was Disney Hulu, so I couldn't, like, people wait for me to show TNA and sex and intercourse, but you got to realize I was dealing with Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. And so I couldn't really do that. But I did try to make sure that people like Eric Sermon, like Little John, you know, JD of Luke, of course. There's a bunch of footage that Luke had that we could have never shown on that documentary. It would have never made a light of day. But if there's a director's uncut version, maybe one day it'll pop out, you know.
How do you know? I mean, there was so much talk around that, and I know I was hyper aware of it because I knew you were behind it. But how do you know how well it does? I mean, you get reports from a streaming platform like Hulu.
Well, Disney,
How do you know?
Hulu didn't give us exact, but they were super happy. It was charting #1 on the Hulu thing. Obviously, the buzz was. It just happened like buzz by us announcing it. It's not like we put any big press. Once we started doing events and whatever, I mean, it was a juggernaut. It was probably the most successful thing that I've done, but also from a Black culture standpoint over the last few years, it's probably been the most successful, other than Puff. I think documentary about Black culture over the last few years. But Hulu doesn't give the
Yeah.
exact numbers, but they were very happy.
Good. And you said that you didn't get to give the Luke Campbell version, but were you happy with it?
Yes, I think to me, everybody was expecting me to go ratchet and show like some wild, lewd stuff. Again, I was working with Hulu and Disney, so please don't think I was on HBO or Max. I think to me, what I do, and like again, Donnell, you've known me for quite a long time, is that I do edutainment, and I've always done edutainment, meaning I educate and I entertain. And so, as much as that film was about debauchery and partying and girls and all of that, it was also about Black nostalgia and love and how city government alienated young Black people and how Black people create something out of nothing, about a city discovering its voice, about young people of color finding their own Woodstock. And so to me, as much as the film was about all of the wild stuff people wanted to see, I was able to educate you with all of it. And I think for most people, when I have done interviews and talked about this film, they were surprised that it was so educational that they learned. And so I try to give you a little booty shake, as Todd says, with a little bit of culture. And so I was happy with it. Of course, I would have rather went a little bit on more on the R-rated side, but funny story. So I was doing the film, and I get to the point where I'm doing post, and I'm looking at some of the archival. I can't remember if it was Daffy Duck, one of those. You remember how the '90s people used to wear the oversized shirts, the big shirts that would just kind of hang, big T-shirts, almost like the white T-shirts that the hip hoppers wore later. I think it was Daffy Duck. One of them was dancing with a girl and like hitting her booty, but he had a Disney shirt on. And you can imagine that Hulu Disney was not going to have Daffy Duck smacking no booty. So you knew that was taken out ASAP. So I'm saying these are the kind of the funny things that, I don't think they want the mouse, you know what I mean, hitting no booty cheeks. But yeah, I mean, I'm satisfied with it. But of course, I would have liked to have taken it a little bit higher if I was on HBO or something like that.
What I always love is about like hip hop and a lot of Black music and culture that I've been exposed to or a part of in one way or another. Is it Albert Murray? He said there's not much distance between Friday night or Saturday night and Sunday morning. So okay. You have a lot of there's the party, there's a connection between the spirituality and the freedom, the self-expression, the partying, the getting down kind of that I don't think you have in other cultures. Certainly I don't think in white culture, not in the same sort of way. And I'm okay. Speaking as kind of an outsider here or as an observer, but I feel like Freaknik kind of gets to that in a little bit of a way,
Well, I think
in terms of the cultural strength of the staying power of these things,
right. You can go from the Blue Flame strip club to church in the morning after you've been all night smoking and drinking Hennessy. I think Black culture is all of those things. You know what I mean? That's what I feel. So.
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes I think that gets lost a little bit.
Go on.
I mean, at least to like outside people, that are. Well, maybe just to like maybe I'm speaking more of as a white audience. I mean, a lot of the spirituality comes through in rap music, but I think there's a connection there that
Well, I think all Black music and Donnell
makes it all possible.
What I think that all Black music comes out of some type of a struggle. I think today we're in the opulent rap era or whatever else, in which Jay-Z and Puff started with the bottles and the hoes and you know what I mean? We got the limos, but the beginning of it, Melly Mel, the start of this thing, Tupac, was about struggle, about people of color trying to make it, which, hip hop is a voice created from people who were outcasts. All of the punk rockers and the hip hoppers were starting out together. Nobody would let them in the club, in the disco, in the late 70s or whatever. So that hip hop was born out of that. Hip hop is born because the after school music programs got killed. So you can't, country music, they can make up some stories about Uncle Billy and his, shotgun and whatever else. But our shit is from real pain, from slavery, from brutality, from racism. You know what I mean? And even though we're in this like bling bling Rolls Royce, white cup, shit we are today, people wearing dresses and all about your rings and clothes. Hip hop is about struggle. You know what I mean? And I think you can't pop music, all of that kind of stuff. You can make a song or fake it, but it's hard for Black people to fake it because it's our real DNA. It's who we are.
You've seen so many phenomenal things. You talk casually about Too Short and Busta and all these people, but I want to go back to the '90s because Lev and I we always want to talk about '90s hip hop, but don't because it's not really in the scope of what we're doing. But here's an opportunity. I asked you to pull off the top of your head the most amazing, unfathomable thing you saw in the '90s. What pops off first thing in your head?
Oh wow, that'd be a crazy one. Well, I saw a lot of
You
stuff. I
might
was at
that you
Eazy-E's
are
funeral.
comfortable saying.
Well, I think just two or three things. Like, when Eric died, I was in the when Eazy-E died, I was in the funeral place when his casket was there, and when the pastor was giving the eulogy, I watched his casket come out of the church. I was at the hospital the next morning after Tupac got shot. I saw Afeni, Jesse Jackson, Mike Tyson, all of those people. I went to visit Suge in Mule Creek State Prison, and he had the probation violation after the Tupac death. And ironically, at the time, he was married to Miss Olay. I think Donnell and I talked about this. And Miss Olay, with a little squeaky voice, the singer, is there at the table signing contracts, and she's asking me with my little twist in my hair, like, are you a writer? Like she's like, you look kind of square to be here with all of this gangster shit. So I think a lot of that crazy stuff, and being at the LA Times, I think when I saw a lot of violence, I covered crime. So there's been times when there's been a gang shooting one day, and then I go back to cover a shooting the next 2 days, and there's still blood on the sidewalk because the people who got killed killed again.
Yeah. I think about what's his name? God, why am I blanking on him? DJ Quick. You remember that whole dust up? I mean,
Oh
I
yeah,
would
yeah.
remember.
DJ Quick. Obviously, there's. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I would. We would go to these clubs. I was thinking of a West Side Connection show I went to. There was gunshots. I ran and hid behind the car. Talked to the guy next to me. Asked if the coast was clear, and he turns around and he's holding heat, telling me, "No, the coast isn't clear." That was just like how the shit was back then.
Donnell, you was just saying something which made me remember a memory. I don't think I was with you that night, but there was an event at the Wilshire. What is the name of that theater on Wilshire? Not Wilshire Bell. They used to have a lot of shows over there. Anyway, it was DJ Quick performing on stage, and all the Death Row dudes showed up to the event. And while DJ Quick was on stage, you can Google this. Uh, Whatever the theater was, DJ Quick was performing on stage. He's a blood. There was a bunch of homeboys from MC8. At the time, they were beefing. They start yelling at DJ Quick, and they started going back and forth. It was a crazy night. And they jumped off stage, and they stomped the guys and beat him up, and they stumped him all the way kind of throughout the theater. The guy ended up dying. You remember this story? And so the next day,
Yeah.
I went to the LA Times where I was a reporter at, and back then they would have the wire, like the AP wire or stories that come across. They say go, whatever else. So guy gets stumped to death or dies at theater, and so I'm there, and my boss is like, you should check this out, and I'm like, oh shit, and then I have to like tell him that I was there, and then the next day or two when I write about it, the police call from the desk at the police station, whatever division that was. It's like, this story has a lot of detail in it. How did it get so much detail? And so the paper covered up for me, but I saw the guy get killed, 300%. I mean, I literally saw
Yeah.
it. So to Donnell's question, yes, I was there when these kind of moments happened because for me as a black journalist, there was no separation. I wasn't Chuck Phillips who could just go do whatever and not have no problems. I knew Method Man. You know what I mean? See, I waited for Suge. I wrote, Daz's bio. So I think to me, the separation of church and state was a little difficult for me back then, back in those eras,
Mhm. Yeah, and that's kind of why I asked that because I feel like that separation between persons it was making it a finite amount of time that you could be at the LA Times. That's what I'm thinking. Does that seem fair to say?
No, I'm not sure. I think I could have stayed. I don't know if I would have evolved and seen so many things and worked in television and had this crazy journey. I probably would have had a good little pension and probably ended up as a correspondent in, Paris or something or working in city government, some beat. But I think the explosion of hip hop needed people from the culture to chronicle it. And so I chose to chronicle the culture versus staying working at Metro.
I look back at the source, and there's so much talent. Like I mentioned, Dimitri Leger was someone who came through last week. You mentioned all these people who are showrunners and writers and Selwyn. Why do you think there's never been a source movie or a proper treatment of that history the way there's been a half dozen Rolling Stone books, but the source was so critical in the culture? Is it the fact that there's so much dirt that you couldn't really tell that story? Or why don't we have that?
Well, I think I'll just be totally transparent. I had a show about the source, I think in 2005 or 4 that I'd gotten to VH1. At the time, there's a gentleman named Londell McMillan, who still owns the source. I've had the source docuseries set up multiple places ready to go because I'm I produce a lot of documentaries and people know that I have that pedigree. You'd have to ask Mr. McMillan about why he sort of never wants to let the IP be shown. I think to some extent he wasn't there. And I think some of the way that the magazine was purchased and gotten from Dave and Benzino plays a part in it. But there's a lot of politics behind it. So, I mean, I'm hoping that one day I've talked to Londell about it a few different times. And I think if he wants to control the narrative, and it's tough to control it when you weren't really there, and now you want the brand to continue, and it may not portray him in the best light all the time. And so I think if you want to know the honest truth, Benzino was a nemesis for a while because he was sort of not the smartest, brightest bulb. Dave, I think, wants to do it now, Dave Mays, but he doesn't own the IP and he can't really control it. So I think at some point, hopefully down the line, myself, Selwyn, Eric Parker, Carlito, or somebody will be able to do it because I think it'll take somebody. And even though I'm like second generation or almost like third generation source because I came in 95, 94, and that they'd started in 89, 90, 91. And so I came toward the middle 90s. But it would have to be myself, Carlito, Selwyn, one of those people to actually go do it because we have the pedigree and the ability.
So there was so much in that statement.
Hopefully one day.
We will never be able to. We will never be able to unpack everything that was in that statement.
All of the copyright, all of the source awards, all of that branding, all of those things we did. Source Sports. Mr. McMillan is the owner of it because he got the source in bankruptcy when Dave and Benzino lost it because of their loans with Black Enterprise. And so until Mr. McMillan gives it up, there's nothing we really can do. And I've had conversations with him about it, so it's not like I haven't tried. It'd be fascinating, by the way.
And we should be clear.
If you ever seen what is that? What is the name of the documentary about the kid who is a writer? Is it Cameron Crowe? Almost Famous? What is the movie?
Almost Famous. That movie.
The feature film.
That was my life. That was our life. That was it. You're like, I wasn't so young, but I lived that kind of wild shit. I waited for Suge for 2 or 3 days, while he sent me girls and fucking wanted me to get drunk. But I'm like, can I just do my interview? So, or being backstage or, with one of the most famous rappers in the world while he dropped his wife off and picked up his girlfriend and took me to his girlfriend's apartment. So, and what you want me to say? So it's just a different time. It's too much social media now. We couldn't be able to do that shit, but that was a different time.
Right. It was a different time. And, I tell people, I worked with kids on a playground in Glendale. I worked at an elementary school after school care program a couple years ago. And you say you saw Tupac in the club, and these 9-year-olds could not believe it because that era is so golden. These people are like demigods, when you talk about it. And I feel like the internet has diversified democratized the media enough that you don't feel that. I don't think you don't feel like they're Superman. No one ever would have thought of Tupac as
Well, you
the
got to
kind of
think, Donnell.
Superman that
Back then, right? You couldn't DM Rihanna, right? You couldn't send a tweet and J. Cole respond. You waited 3 or 4 months before an article came out. I have to tell you about what the album sounded like in my record report. You couldn't go download it the day of. You had to wait until it came out on a CD. So I think that access to artists is gotten better because of social media, but I think it's gotten worse. I think the superstars can DM you and give access. They were more aloof. They were like our superheroes, and now they're regular people. If Rihanna wants to get mad or Nicki Minaj goes off on a Twitter rant, you know what I mean? Kanye obviously is the best example of a guy who is a little bit unwieldy and shouldn't have a phone. Back then, a publicist would have never let him have that phone and got him into all of that kind of stuff. It would have been crisis resolution, you know what I'm saying, with the quickness.
Yeah. I have to point out, as you mentioned, L. Londell McMillan, two things about him. He's the person, Lev, who's holding back the Prince documentary. You know, he's in charge of that, and he owes me $2,000. I just want to be clear because he said he would sue me if I kept on his ass about it. But that motherfucker owes me $2,000, and I would like to have it back. What are your questions about '90s?
Oh, you wrote something for the source. You wrote something for the source.
Yeah, it was Common. I never got paid for my Common cover story.
You put yourself in line with 1,000 other people. So
I'm saying, I'm not happy about it. Lev, you want to ask something about the '90s?
Well, I don't know. I was a '90s hip hop kid. I mean, I was actually hip hop kid since my dad, he brought home the Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5 record when I was, 10 years old or something. But, you were talking about, you had all the white suburban kids. And what was it from the artist's perspective? I mean, obviously, they're happy to make the record sales. They'll sell the record to whoever will buy it. But what was that cultural rift like, like backstage at a show and the audience is like, largely white or something? How did the artists deal with that?
Well, I think that we were teachers of it. You were bringing these kids into your world. They're not going to go in the Bronx or East Oakland and have to see like murder, death, kill, and family struggle. They were living in suburbia. So they were living out a fantasy through the record. You know what I mean? And I think, I always say back then, it's a trip because if you know what a cipher is basically when people are b-boying, they're dancing, or somebody is rapping, and then you're all around, right? And so 83, 84, whatever, Beat Street, whatever that shit, 87, when I had the cardboard and the Kango and the airbrush on my shirt with the Playboy or whatever, all that stuff I was doing. All those kids, those white kids, they stood on the outside of the cipher. Now I'm in meetings, they're telling me what the cipher is. And so there's a different thing from that white America's telling me what hip hop is. And before they were just happy to join in the cipher. So I'm saying I think that was a different period where a kid like you were living out some fantasy by watching these kind of hardcore rappers that you never lived in your neighborhood get to see perform, Run DMC. You know what I mean? Once it got to Death Row, Bad Boy, they became even a little bit more gangster. Wu-Tang, kind of grimy. They didn't live in Long Island. They didn't live in Hayward. They didn't live in Westchester. And so to me, I like it though, because I like the fact that there's a young thug who can wear a dress, that there's a little Nas X can express his homosexuality or whatever else, because all of that work and all of that time that I put in for them to get that is important. I want anybody who loves music and culture to not have access. Back in the day, they would have been shunned. They would have been called whatever else. I remember when you would sing on a record, Ja Rule, 50 Cent, motherfuckers be like, that's whack. But now it's the number one thing. So I'm just saying things change and the culture changes. So I think it's both a blessing and a curse that the culture's become so mainstream that it's diluted some of the real dirt that I came from. You feel what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to downplay. I don't want to downplay Lev's background, but he's the person who informed me of the famous E40 Rasheed Wallace battle up here in Portland. That was a rivalry that doesn't make it into most maps. Am I right? Okay. It was serious.
They had some real beef up here in Portland. I got to witness them squash their beef on stage.
Oh, dope. Shout out to Earl.
Yeah. Girl, I love E40. A
You
friend
gotta watch
turned me on
E40
to him when I
Unsung.
was a kid. And that
Have
was
you ever
great.
seen it?
I will. No, I have not
Yeah.
seen that. I want to
You
watch
can.
that.
I think you can Google it. I took Earl back to his first childhood home, or maybe he was a teenager. We went to the Vallejo Crest, where people were still riding horses and they had chickens. All of that kind of shit. You know what I mean? Me and Earl went back to do that, and so, no, man, it's a beautiful thing to see this culture progress to where I can do a show like Hip Hop Homicides on WeTV, or I could put Freaknik on Hulu, and that the audience is more not of color than color. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but I feel happy that the culture has progressed where Nicki Minaj and LL Cool J can become the host of the Grammys when they wouldn't even let me in the room in '95. So I see the pendulum.
Where do you think? Where do you see it going from here? Like, where's the pendulum swinging next?
I'm not sure, because I think that so much of the originality and creativity has become so copycat. I don't want to be like the old dude in the club, like, oh, y'all just drink white cups and wear weird clothes and tight pants and overdub your music and, or put on some T-Pain, whatever that little effect. But I do think the originality is coming back a little bit more, because I think people have to be different. That's what when in 92, 91, 93, Wu-Tang, De La Soul, Biggie, you had so many different places, different kind of voices, and you couldn't be Humpty Dance. You couldn't be like everybody else. We come from an era where biting, that's the fucking worst thing you can ever do, is be a biter. And today, being a biter, the record company wants the 15 of the same thing. You feel what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to find something that's going to stand out now amongst all the internet slop there.
Right.
The obvious question is, what are you working on next?
Well, I'm currently going to be doing next season of Must Be the Money, the podcast. I got a really dope Busta Rhymes series. Hopefully will come out at some point, which is the Busta Rhymes docu series. I got a scripted project that's really amazing in the hip hop world. I'm working on a series with all of the mothers, Trayvon Martin's mother, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, all of the mothers kind of catching up. Next year is 15 years of Trayvon Martin. I got a Business of Hip Hop kind of series that talks about the business behind it, the IP. And then I got my Roger Troutman, which is my baby movie project. It's about Roger Troutman, a limited series. So me and Big Snoop was working on that. So, man, I just keep trying to tell these stories, man, and whether it be podcasts, television shows, unscripted, scripted, I just, I keep applying pressure so that our stories aren't forgotten. Still that same kid, Donnell, from the 90s,
Mm-hmm. But I just want to make sure, because it seems like, it was always serious, because you're talking about Eazy-E at the very beginning. But when you talk about Freaknik and the Money series, it sounds like you're moving away from purely entertainment. Is that fair?
No, I think that hip hop is not just some motherfuckers standing on stage. It's IP. It's Joe Budden owning his podcast. It's Issa Rae being a businesswoman. So the days when it's just about me partying and trying to get some 40s and smoke and get a few girls, that's over. Us owning our IPs, us being in charge as business persons, us owning our own networks. You can't, you know what I'm saying? You can't be a hoe for the system forever. And I think, to me, unlike jazz, hip hop has gotten to a better place where we're owning our stuff, owning our IP. Shout out to Matt Barnes. They own all the smoke. You know what I mean? They can now go license that to do whatever. So I think the business of entertainment is what I'm concerned. And, like you, we didn't own it in the beginning. I just think there's more people who are owning the IP. Look at E40. E40 has so many restaurants and alcohol and all kind of businesses, and you know what I mean, that make more money than the rapping. And so to me, that's the future, is to be able to take our IPs, own it, and for more people of color to be in charge of those things. I don't want to have to be, and I'm not going to say the network, but I was doing a show, and the parent company was one of the most conservative companies in the whole world. You could take a guess what company it was, Mr. Rupert Murdoch. And it was a story about people of color. It was a show, and it was like a street show about crime and murder. and the notes and the ridiculousness of some of those executives, like, well, why does he have multiple baby mamas? Or if some people were shooting in the hood, why did he go back over there? And it's just the most ridiculous stuff you can imagine. But if we would have more people in color in charge of that actual show, other than just me as the showrunner, then I wouldn't have to answer these stupid ass questions from people who are trying to profit off of it, but don't live it. And so I think that's the thing. When you see Joe Budden, you see people like that. I like the fact that they don't have to beg somebody to get their message out. The number one thing I think for the culture going forward, owning your stuff. You see the little babies, they got food franchises, they own their IP, all of that. And so we not hoes no more. You know what I mean? Either gonna be a pimp or you're a hoe. And I think it's better to be pimping, I'm from East Oakland, than to just be hoeing. Not to be so blunt, but just keeping it one thou wow.
Do you know Terrence Caples? Do you know Cool Nuts that hangs out with
I just was
E40?
texting with Cool Nuts. I'm talking to him tomorrow. Hilarious.
Yeah. I used to, I think I shared this once before on the podcast, but when I was a kid, we went to the same high school. And
I have to tell him tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, he went to the grocery store that I lived right near, and he'd sell me alcohol. I'd buy 40s from him. Yeah, when I was like 17 years old.
Yeah.
He's a cool guy. He's done a lot for Portland hip hop too.
Yeah, he's 40's manager.
Oh, is he? Okay, that's cool.
Wow,
Yeah,
I didn't know
like
that.
Terrence. I mean, I haven't talked to him in a long time, but he was always cool.
I'll tell him you said.
So Frank Williams, you've enlightened us. I love what you've done, man. I mean, we were kids. You were really a kid because you're younger than me, but you haven't slowed down one bit, man. You always were on track to do some shit. I don't know when you took a break, but I love what you've done. And how many BET awards do you have?
No,
How
I have
many?
Emmy. I have eight NAACP Image Awards mainly for show Unsung. I produced about 30 episodes of Unsung and Sunday Best and a whole bunch of shows. So, Donnell, I think, since we were drinking beers and acting crazy in the 90s, I think I just kind of keep going. And I feel so people always tell me, damn, you still going at it. Or it's unbelievable that I'm still sort of relevant. And I think it's because I'm just a chameleon and I'm a Gemini. So I just try to keep one foot on the gas and then stop. Because I never want to stop. I always say, if I die today, I'm happy how my life turned out. It's like 50 said, I'm going to go for it, and Nas, why shoot the breeze about it when you could be about it? So we don't want to talk too much. We want to do. And I think that that's important. And I have a lot of losses. I lost jobs. I lost money. Almost been bankrupt. I've been divorced. You know what I mean? I almost had a heart attack a few months ago, but I just keep going. And I think if my message to any young person, a person in any kind of culture or job is to, is what Russell told me, just show up every day at work and put in a good day at work, and just do the best you can and then start back over the next day. And that's what I do.
Wow. Well, I think I need to continue to learn and continue to grow because I'm a little tired, but yeah, you're inspirational as friends go. So thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
I appreciate y'all. You man, keep your head up and much love. And Donnie, I'm gonna see you in the West. We coming to LA, holla at your boy.